Forget everything you thought was over, because the humiliation was apparently just getting started. The comeback was meant to be flawlessly orchestrated. The cameras were expected to capture every moment. The headlines were supposed to cheer a grand royal reunion. Instead, whispers raced across Britain like wildfire. Suddenly, Harry and Meghan were hit with the one response they never saw coming, a cold, unmistakable message from the country they once proudly called home. Not this time. It all started with what insiders dramatically labeled the Sussex return strategy. For months, rumors claimed Harry and Meghan were quietly preparing a carefully orchestrated return to Britain's spotlight. Not a complete return, not an official royal comeback, but something far more calculated. A strategy meant to remind everyone that despite California, despite Hollywood, despite every interview, documentary, podcast, and memoir, their strongest asset was still their royal connection. And according to whispers echoing through palace corridors, the real centerpiece of that strategy was not Harry. It was not Meghan. It was Archie and Lily.
A little bit twisted and even more sick. The real reason that Prince Harry and Meghan Markle are bringing their children, Archie and Lily, to the United Kingdom next month is not because they want to have some lovely meeting with King Charles, who they have deprived from his brethren for all this time. It is rather as a PR stunt to unveil their faces to the entire world and start bringing in the moolah.
I believe it's an act of desperation. Meghan is impervious to shame.
I do think that she risks being booed if she puts herself out there too much in the UK, and if it weren't unprofessional.
For years, those children were guarded like the world's biggest state secrets. Every single photograph looked obsessively planned down to the tiniest detail. A shoulder here, a silhouette there, a blurry profile, another carefully hidden face. Somehow, the mystery itself became part of the Sussex brand. The children turned into the one royal story nobody could completely see. Then, almost overnight, speculation exploded that the entire family might finally appear together on British soil. At first, many believed the public would respond warmly. After all, children are simply children. Surely Britain would welcome them with open arms. But that is not what happened. The atmosphere suddenly felt completely different. The public conversation was no longer driven by excitement. It became fueled by questions. Endless questions. Questions that nobody seemed able to answer. Why now? Why after years of keeping their distance? Why after years of criticizing the institution? Why after repeatedly claiming Britain was no longer safe enough for their family? And perhaps the biggest question of all, why did this feel far less like a genuine family visit and far more like another carefully staged publicity campaign?
On a big game, and I watch people fall for it every time. I will eat my shoe if those children appear at the Invictus Games events alongside Harry. Honestly, I do.
The more those questions kept piling up, the worse the situation suddenly looked, because every tiny detail was now under the microscope. Every statement, every public appearance, every old interview was dragged back into the spotlight. And the deeper people dug, the more awkward everything seemed to become. The whispers only grew louder. Some commentators even claimed Britain had developed complete royal fatigue when it came to Harry and Meghan. Others argued the public simply no longer believed the motives behind anything the couple chose to do. Then came the rumor that truly sent royal watchers into absolute overdrive. According to palace gossip, several behind-the-scenes proposals tied to the family's public appearances were reportedly receiving far less enthusiasm than anyone expected. There was no dramatic showdown, no official rejection, no public humiliation, just a growing feeling that doors which once opened effortlessly were no longer swinging open so easily. That was exactly when one phrase suddenly started echoing everywhere. Not this time. Not this time for special treatment. Not this time for sympathy. Not this time for another headline-grabbing royal drama. And just like that, the carefully crafted comeback narrative began crumbling beneath the weight of its own expectations.
Significant because it's the countdown to Invictus. Now, the countdown to Invictus is a trivial occurrence. I mean, it's something Harry could have jumped on a Zoom and said, okay, folks, a year to go. Good luck. Let's go for it. Why are they all coming for what is a nothing burger? A clear message that the Sussexes want to be back in the royal fold, part of the family, and also some kind of public-facing royal.
What made this entire situation even more embarrassing was the timing. In royal drama, timing has always been everything, and this could not have arrived at a worse moment. While senior royals quietly carried on with official duties, public engagements, and constant appearances, Harry and Meghan once again found themselves battling uncomfortable questions about their relevance. And relevance can be absolutely ruthless. When you have it, everyone wants a piece of you. The moment you lose it, everyone notices. According to gossip swirling through royal commentator circles, that harsh reality was becoming impossible to ignore. The California dream was supposed to deliver total independence, freedom, a billion-dollar brand, and a global empire. Instead, critics argued the couple kept being drawn back toward the very institution they once insisted they desperately needed to escape. Britain noticed that contradiction. More importantly, Britain remembered everything. People remembered the interviews. People remembered the accusations. People remembered the documentaries. People remembered the memoir. Those memories never disappeared. They simply stayed quiet, waiting for the perfect moment before resurfacing all over again.
My opinion. I do not believe for a second that Meghan is going to allow those children to be casually walking around on camera. I do not believe that we will see Archie and Lily walking around with mummy and daddy at the Invictus event in a couple of weeks, like we see the Wales children with their family, because that would mean Meghan would have to give up control of their images. There is no way that Meghan is going to stop playing the social media games that she does with those two children, and she would have to do that if they're suddenly on camera for the world.
What truly terrified Sussex supporters was not anger. Anger can be controlled. Anger creates headlines. Anger fuels engagement. The real nightmare was something far worse, complete indifference. And according to several observers, that indifference was already beginning to spread. For any public figure, that is the ultimate disaster. Not criticism, not controversy, simply being ignored. Because the moment people stop caring, winning back influence becomes almost impossible. Meanwhile, rumors continued swirling about possible appearances, potential family meetings, and secret negotiations supposedly unfolding behind palace walls. Some reports insisted doors were finally opening. Others claimed those same doors were quietly closing. Some suggested reconciliation was just around the corner. Others argued relationships remained completely frozen. Nobody seemed to know what was actually true. But one thing was becoming impossible to ignore. The grand comeback so many people expected was clearly not unfolding the way Harry and Meghan had imagined. Instead of triumphant headlines, they were met with skepticism. Instead of celebration, they faced relentless scrutiny. Instead of applause, they encountered difficult questions. And questions can be dangerous because they force people to take a closer look. They expose contradictions. They keep stories alive. The deeper this saga went, the stranger everything became. What first appeared to be nothing more than a simple family visit was suddenly transforming into something much bigger. Something far more uncomfortable for Harry and Meghan than they had ever anticipated. The issue was no longer whether Britain would welcome them. The issue had become the one question they never wanted people asking. What exactly are they coming back for? That question hovered over every rumor, every leaked detail, and every supposed plan. The more often it was asked, the faster the entire narrative appeared to unravel. Just think about that. For years, Britain was described as the place they had escaped. The place they claimed brought pain, disappointment, and frustration. The place they repeatedly insisted they needed to leave behind. Yet somehow, every road now seemed to lead straight back to Britain. Back to the royal connection. Back to the very institution they once claimed they desperately wanted to escape. That contradiction became increasingly difficult to ignore. According to whispers circulating throughout royal circles, even some former supporters were beginning to notice it. The atmosphere had undeniably shifted. The sympathy that once dominated headlines was no longer guaranteed. The curiosity that once worked in their favor was steadily turning into skepticism. And skepticism changes everything because once people begin questioning motives, every move suddenly looks suspicious. Even the possibility of a family appearance became controversial. People stopped asking what Harry and Meghan would do. Instead, they started asking why. Why now? Why together? Why Britain? Why after all this time? Perhaps the most damaging question of all was why this looked more like a carefully crafted strategy than a genuine family reunion. That became the question nobody could escape. The whispers only intensified after stories emerged suggesting several anticipated meetings behind palace walls were far less certain than early reports had claimed. Publicly, The image being presented suggested healing relationships and warming family ties. Behind the scenes, according to royal gossip, the reality looked much colder. Some claimed influential figures remained firmly resistant. Others insisted old wounds were simply too deep to repair. Then came the rumor that sent royal watchers into complete overdrive. The suggestion was not that Britain had directly rejected Harry and Meghan. Instead, Britain had rejected the performance, rejected the spectacle, and rejected what critics described as an attempt to rewrite history. Because there is an enormous difference between forgiveness and forgetting. People may forgive, but they rarely forget. According to The Growing Mood, Britain had forgotten absolutely nothing. Not the interviews, not the accusations, not the explosive claims, not the family drama that dominated headlines for years. Those memories never disappeared. They simply waited beneath the surface until someone acted as though they had never existed. According to critics, that moment had finally arrived, and it was spectacularly backfiring. The most brutal part for Harry and Meghan was that nobody actually needed to attack them. Nobody had to organize against them. Nobody had to launch some dramatic campaign. Britain simply had to shrug its shoulders. That was the real humiliation. Public indifference is far more dangerous than public outrage. Outrage generates attention. Indifference erases relevance. And according to several royal observers, that appeared to be exactly what was unfolding. The headlines were still there. The conversations still existed. But the emotional investment seemed noticeably weaker. The excitement felt lower. The willingness to embrace every new chapter appeared to be fading. For a couple whose public identity became deeply connected to controlling the narrative, losing control of the audience was the ultimate nightmare. Then another uncomfortable truth began echoing through royal gossip circles. What if Britain no longer viewed Harry and Meghan as the future of the royal story? What if they had quietly become nothing more than a side story? That possibility deeply unsettled their supporters because it changed everything. A side story cannot control the agenda. A side story cannot demand endless attention. A side story cannot expect the palace to revolve around it. Meanwhile, the working royals simply kept moving forward. Official events continued. Public engagements continued. Royal appearances continued. The institution kept functioning. The machine never stopped moving. That may have been the harshest reality of them all. The monarchy survived. The palace survived. The family survived. Life carried on. Suddenly, the dramatic return many had expected looked far less like a glorious comeback and far more like a desperate attempt to recover lost relevance. By the time everything settled, the message emerging from royal gossip circles seemed surprisingly straightforward. Britain had not necessarily slammed every door shut. Britain had not declared war. Britain had not officially rejected anyone. Instead, the country appeared to deliver something potentially even more damaging. Collective hesitation. A pause. A refusal to instantly embrace the latest chapter without asking difficult questions. That hesitation felt humiliating because it exposed the one thing Harry and Meghan desperately needed, but could no longer guarantee: genuine public enthusiasm. That became the real story. Not the visit, not the rumors, not the endless speculation. The real story was that, for the first time in years, the audience seemed to be deciding the conversation instead of Harry and Meghan. And if that pattern continues, the next chapter could prove even more challenging than anything they have faced before. Because once Britain starts saying, "Not this time," the real question becomes what happens when it eventually says something even harsher. Nothing at all.